morning, everyone. Welcome to Connect Karo and to this session on expanding the limits, making the clean energy growth curves circular. It's quite a wordy title, but really what we're trying to look at is how do we look at the energy transition and how do we not move away from the sort of linear approach that we usually think of transitions to really thinking of making this a circular thing. Now, we all heard this morning about India's significantly high, ambitious renewable energy targets. Not so long ago, we had a target of achieving 20 gigawatts of solar. This was in 2008. 2008, we had this target of 20 gigawatts of solar by 2020. We increased this ambition to 175 gigawatts by 2022. And now we are talking about close to 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030. This increased focus on green development and specific policy and regulatory support to renewable energy, to energy storage, to other aspects of the energy transition and energy security help India move down this trajectory towards a sustainable energy transition. But as I said, this transition is actually unlikely to be linear. It's unlikely to be easy. And also there is no ready playbook that we can copy from. Every country, every region in this world is going to have to figure out its own way based on the resources available. But one thing is clear, and we heard this also from the morning session, that the destination is very clear and the journey is well underway. Globally, the rise of renewable energy has brought great hope for our combined ability to address climate change. India's climate strategy, as many of us know, is significantly an energy strategy. And the transition to increased renewable energy, renewable energy use brings substantial benefits, not just in terms of reducing emissions, but also in terms of energy security. Again, we heard our chief guest in the morning talk about how India aims to move from a net energy importer to a net energy exporter. And though these benefits are substantial, virtually no sector is universally sustainable in its impact. And this morning's session is to look at one such aspect of the renewable energy sector, to look specifically at how we can bring more circularity to the renewable energy systems and value chains and into the energy transition more broadly. In renewable energy systems, when we use the word renewable, we're only talking about the fuel. We know there's a large number of materials and minerals, including critical minerals and rare earth elements that are going to be needed for this renewable energy growth. Not just for solar panels and windmills, but also for batteries, for other storage technologies that will need to be deployed alongside the renewable energy technologies. We also know about the significant amount of waste that is already being generated and that will get generated during the life cycle of these technologies. I'll briefly mention three studies. In 2016, IRENA study estimated that solar PV waste could be as high as 60 to 70 million tons by 2050, of which 4.5 to 7 million tons were estimated to be generated from India. A 2017 Cambridge University study estimated that waste generated from wind turbines globally could be as high as 43 million tons by 2050. WRI's own research from 2021 shows that less than 17.4% of e-waste, electronic waste, is recycled. As on date, much of the RE waste ends up in solid waste dump yards. Recycling technologies and industry is still very nascent in the country, though there is significant opportunity for innovations to extract useful materials and or use them for a second life. Implementation of circularity in renewables can address both these waste management as well as providing input material requirements. And so it's important for us to prioritize low-cost, high-yield technologies that can establish a reverse supply chain of these materials and aid in manufacturing. We have a panel of experts who are going to help us explore some of these questions. But it's important to recognize that while globalization has enabled easy flow of technologies, we must also focus on innovation and R&D in country. Government organizations like the CMET, who is represented on the panel, and other institutions like the IITs and the other technology institutions should take the lead in supporting more R&D and in working more closely with the private sector. And we'll also hear, before the end of this session, we'll also hear from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy about the enabling environment that the Government of India is considering in this space. So before I invite our panel on the stage, I'd like to welcome all of you again and acknowledge the partners, many of whom we have worked with. Your Madhav in the morning session talked about the Responsible Energy Initiative, and several of you are here. So I'd like to also recognize all of you here. And now I'd like to call on my colleague, Deepak Krishnan, who to take the panel forward.
We'll commence the panel discussion, and as and when Mr. Lalit Bora joins, we will also hear from him, as Bharat mentioned. To just set a little bit of a context, Madhav talked about the Responsible Energy Initiative, and what we are going to focus on today is only a very small aspect of what we mean by responsible energy. So the idea is that this whole initiative will look at from the sourcing of minerals till the end of life of renewable energy technologies, to see that social and environmental impacts are minimized, and also clear the misconception that renewable energy is 100% benign. Of course, there have been commentaries and voices raised as saying, fossil fuels have got such a free reign. Why are such limits being placed on renewables? The idea is not that. The idea is not to throttle renewables or create onerous conditions upon them for their growth. But problems which are identified earlier and nipped in the bud can go a long way towards a more peaceful coexistence and development. So that is the idea behind today's panel discussion, which will focus largely on recycling of renewable energy material, and primarily our focus will be a lot on solar, given how predominant it is within India's energy mix, the pace at which it has surpassed wind as India's primary renewable energy source. Of course, not to say that recycling is not applicable in the case of wind. It is, but today's focus will look a lot at solar. We have a very esteemed panel today, and I will.
Thank you, sir. Online meeting.
Okay, so I think I'll start requesting the panelists to come on as I call out your name and give a brief introduction. First would be Mr. Ankit Kapasi, who is a sustainability and ESG lead at DSS Plus India. He's a sustainability practitioner with over 23 years of experience working as an environmental consultant, trainer, and coach. Welcome. We next have Dr. D.S. Prasad, who is joining us online. If we could have his screen displayed, please. Dr. Prasad is a scientist at the Center for Materials and Electronics Technology in Hyderabad, under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. He has obtained his PhD from JNTU Hyderabad and has hands-on experience in the refining and purification of electronic materials, and has been instrumental in developing indigenous technology for the production of ultra high pure tellurium and cadmium, up to 7 times. We also heard Mr. Kant talk about technology advances and entrepreneurs. So Dr. Prasad's inputs in terms of how this indigenous technology can help us accelerate further will be very valuable. Welcome, Dr. Prasad. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Ke Wang, who is the Program Director for PACE, which stands for Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy. She leads PACE efforts to build public-private collaborations and drive actions at scale, guided by the Circular Economy Action Agenda. She's also responsible for PACE content development and knowledge management. Our next panelist is Ms. Melissa Barbanel, who is the director of the United States International Engagement for the Climate Program at the World Resources Institute. In her role, she leads high-level climate and energy dialogues between non-governmental US participants and counterparts in China, India, and the European Union. And the objectives of these dialogues are to strengthen the avenues of communication through informal discussions on critical issues to facilitate climate action. Welcome. We next have Mr. Sujoy Ghosh, who is the Vice President and Country Managing Director for India at First Solar. He joined First Solar in 2012 and has supervised the build out of the company's India business, resulting in an overall installed base of 2 gigawatt plus in India with their thin film modules. So we roughly have about 35-40 minutes of panel discussion planned, after which I'll open it up for questions from the audience and would request your active engagement and participation in the discussions. I think I'll start off with requesting all the panelists. We all have a shared interest and expertise in circularity, energy, and environment in different combinations within this panel. May I request all of you to give a short introduction? I've of course spoken very briefly about you, but if you can talk a little bit more about your work, maybe for 2 to 3 minutes, and while speaking, if you could also give an overview of how the subject of circularity in clean energy, whether it is in terms of challenges or opportunities, how it is manifesting in your work. Maybe I could request Melissa, if you could start, please.
Thank you, Deepak. Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Barbanel. I am with World Resources Institute US, and I'm the Director of US International Engagement. In that role, I run several Track 2 dialogues, which are non-governmental experts who are policymakers or policy influencers in the United States and their counterparts in India and in China and in the European Union. In that work, we focus on a broad range of issues, everything from green hydrogen to power sector decarbonization, the role of trade in impacting climate change, and critical minerals. My background, I come from the mining sector. I spent 15 years doing sustainability work in the mining sector, and a lot of my focus has been on the critical minerals question. Within the question of circularity and critical minerals, one area of focus that I've been exploring and that the U.S. Department of Energy and others and some of the industry partners are exploring is how to recover minerals from tailings. Tailings is a waste stream that exists from current mines or abandoned mines, and when these mines were operating, they might have been looking for different minerals, which means that some of the critical minerals that we're after right now are still sitting out there in their waste products. There's a lot of research going on regarding how we might be able to remine those tailings, whether it could be done cheaper and more economically than the impacts that you would make to virgin land if you wanted to build new mines. So that's one question I'm looking at, and recognizing that right now there are some pilot projects that are going on and some early stage projects. This right now is not a very economic method of recovering minerals, but it's being explored. The U.S. Department of Energy has done a lot of work on coal waste and rare earth element extraction from coal waste. One thing to consider is how to create policy incentives to motivate this kind of activity. In the United States, we run into the problem of Superfund, which is a law that would hold somebody strictly liable for any impact at an existing site. So there's questions about how you create incentives and protect new companies that want to go in and effectively clean up these wastes and recover minerals. So that's one area where circularity is playing into my work. Thank you.
Thanks, Deepak. Very good morning. I'm Sujoy from First Solar. First Solar's the world's largest manufacturer of thin film photovoltaics and one of the top 10 global manufacturers across all PV technologies. We have very recently started trial production at our new fully integrated end-to-end semiconductor to module manufacturing facility in Tamil Nadu, in Sri Perumbudur. And glad to mention that we've also commissioned, along with the factory, 800 tons per week high volume recycling unit. So this will be the country's first end-of-life panel recycling unit, which we've installed. It's installed across all of our First Solar facilities wherever they are in the world, whether in the US, in Malaysia, or Vietnam. And predominantly our technology essentially embodies circularity, right? We basically take our semiconductor from the waste streams of copper and zinc smelters and then make it into a product which displaces carbon, and at the end of its usable life we recycle and recover up to 90% of the overall material and about 95% of the semiconductor in the panel and reuse it. So essentially I think as we go along the way there is a lot of policy and regulations at play around end-of-life recycling of modules with the e-waste policy from the Government of India. But I think there is a lack of clarity on the specifics of the rules. And as through these dialogues which we have, it will be good for all the participants to kind of align on what the rules of the game will be. The what is very clear, but the how is where there is a lot of gaps. And I think stakeholders like WRI are very critical in helping the government formulate the why. So we'll be very keen to participate in those interactions.
Dr. Kerwan, I could request you to go next.
Thank you, Deepak. I work at a platform hosted by WRI Europe, based in the Netherlands. The platform is all about circular economy. So my personal background, I'm trained as a physicist and also business. So I spent the first decade of my career doing technological innovation for healthcare in the private sector. And then about 7 years ago, I came across the concept of circular economy and really got hooked. I was fascinated by the vision that we can continue to deliver economic well-being without sacrificing the planet. So I've been working on circular economy ever since. I set up European projects. The very first one I set up was circular economy business models for the solar power sector. And then about 4 years ago, I joined WRI Europe, joined PACE, where we really looked into different value chains. What does circular economy mean for different value chains and how to deliver those? We also looked into cross-cutting metrics. How do we define targets? How do we measure progress? As well as how can circular economy contribute to climate change mitigation? So for me, I was really looking at how can circular economy really contribute to climate change in short term. And I'm convinced that circularity in renewable energy is one of those sweet spots. So I'm quite excited to actually starting to work with WRI Energy team, working with Melissa, with REI team, to really develop a new line of work at WRI on minerals and circularity for the clean energy transition. So Deepak, this is becoming my really, everyday job. And there's so much learning from the other sectors on circular economy, which can be applied to clean energy, but happy to talk about that later.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Ankit?
Sure. Thanks, Deepak, and good morning, everyone. Pleasure to meet you all. My name is Ankit Kapasi. I work for DSS. It's a sustainability consultancy. I have been personally a consultant since 98, 99. So for a good 20, 23 plus years. Circularity, of course, we've been practicing as a race for a long time. Early 2000s, we started doing waste management, energy efficiency. Excuse me. And the terminology, of course, circular economy came much later. But this is something we've been practicing for a while. In terms of renewable energy, this is in 2018, we started doing a project with Signify Foundation, formerly Philips Lighting, looking at how circularity in the renewable sector, particularly we started with off-grid solar and then went into specifically photovoltaic panels, could be tried, tested. So starting with a study or a desk-based study, but moving on to a pilot. And we ran a pilot with Signify Foundation, with Doan Foundation, and set up a 2 tons per day pilot facility in Chennai. very, very glad to hear, Sujoy, that you managed to commercialize it and have something on the ground. This is something we've been vying to do. Of course, not ourselves, but making sure that technology remain available. What we did was a technical feasibility study, a financial feasibility study, what kind of models will be required. And I guess everyone in the room will want an answer. I agree, the what is there, how do we do this remains a question. We worked on the e-waste sector, so I look forward to having a wider discussion about how we become more circular in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll now turn to Dr. Prasad. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Deepak, and good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. D.S. Prasad, working for Center for Materials for Electronics Technology, CMET. It's a R&D laboratory under Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, mighty government of India. In fact, our thrust area is to develop the indigenous technology for a range of electronics materials up to highest purity, 99 point, followed by 5.79 purity, and we focus mainly on the development of tellurium, cadmium, and germanium and all other electronic materials used for semiconductor applications. So we supplied this high pure materials of tellurium and cadmium to Ministry of Defense Solid State Physics Laboratory, and we are supplying them as and when they require, and we are going to transfer this technology. And apart from that, as you are all aware that there will be in the coming 3 to 4 years, there will be huge accumulation of waste solar photovoltaic modules. So government of India has identified this area as its thrust area and assigned the task to CMET to develop the technology, to develop recycling technology for end of life crystalline silicon solar photovoltaic modules. This project we initiated in the year 2020, and they also asked us to associate with the industry at the beginning of the work, and also that we have approached Mrs. Greenco, one of the leading renewable energy companies, and they have associated with us. Last year we had a MOU with them, and in CMET we developed the technology for recovery of valuable materials, and we primarily focused on the value depending upon the priority of the value based materials. That is, silicon is the most semiconductor materials, so we focused to recover silicon initially, and other materials, copper and also we could able to recover the materials, and basically lead, even it is not a very value added materials, and considering its toxic nature, we are also recovering the lead also from the materials. So we have now developed the technology, and we are now focusing on the upscaling the technology and with our industry partner Greenco. That's all from CMET.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Prasad. I think the question I had for you, maybe we'll start the formal panel discussion, building on the point that you mentioned about the technology transfer to Greenco, mainly about extraction, recovery of silicon from spent silicon solar modules. You mentioned about scaling, but what do you think are the next few steps to scale this technology? And given that even in technology we are going to see continued either incremental or very rapid transformative changes, how do you think that technology can be made modular to incorporate all these advancements?
Yeah, in fact, this basic requirement is the availability of the raw material. The basic raw material, now initially we got about a ton of material from E-Parisara Bangalore. They have the lot of e-waste material. So they given us the material, and in Hyderabad also, in fact, we are slightly struggle to get the raw material. That is one of the basic challenges, waste material, getting the raw waste material. And second thing is the technology is encapsulating materials, removal of the separation of the encapsulated material. It is a very challenging area. So we have to develop a technology, a cost-effective technology. We are from the very beginning we are focusing on the effective technology. Even globally also there is a technology is available for recycling, and cost-effective technology has not yet been established. So that way, from the beginning we have focused on the developing a very cost-effective technology. So now we have at a reasonably good scale, we could able to recover the silicon of 4N to 5N purity levels. So first we had to identify who are the end users of this required material. So silicon, whether it is used, we can give it back to the solar manufacturers, solar cell manufacturers. So that would be beneficial for the market. So when industry will approach us, whenever there is a product, whenever there is a demand for the required materials. So now we are identifying the end users for the required materials.
Sure, sir.
And,
Just one follow-up question. You mentioned that it's a challenge to get raw materials. Is it because of the fact that waste disposal is not that well segregated? Electronic waste disposal is not happening, at a scale that you would need, given that things get dumped with, say, dry waste in cities. Is that one of the main causes, or?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It has to be properly managed, the waste material. Like manufacturer itself, initially they should take back the raw material, waste material. They should include that cost in their while selling itself. The manufacturer solar modules and if they sell, they should include that waste material. When they get it back, they have to give some money to the customer. That money they have to include in the initial price itself, so that it will be properly managed. So that initial stages. Once it is a profitable business and all, then more partners come into this sector.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Prasad. Ankit, I'll just turn to you. You mentioned about the Solar Waste Action Plan along with Poseidon Solar, Signify Foundation, and the Dune Foundation. What are the key lessons you learned from that project? And again, a similar question to what I asked Dr. Prasad. How do we scale it up? Because that's the challenge which we are going to face.
Sure. I think Dr. Prasad talked about one of the challenges. This is about acquiring the panel. So if you were to do it in-house, like Sujoy mentioned, I think you have your volumes, you can cater to that. When you talk about commercializing a pilot that we had planned, right now the pilot, the machineries exist, but to make it commercial or even to run it at 2 tons per day is not feasible because panels are considered an asset. Increasingly less so, but I'll maybe share an anecdote from 2019. When the first half a dozen phone calls after having started the pilot with people who were holding these waste panels, people quoting everything from 2,000 to 6,000 rupee a panel to sell it to us. Now that directly made the whole process unviable. Of course, it was a pilot. We did not have the funds to acquire the panel. But if you imagine this now going into a commercial model, that wouldn't happen. Having said that, the good news is as we ran more into the pilot, there were several people who are willing to depart with the waste. This is, of course, because people had started hearing about upcoming legislation. What will we do with the tons of panels lying on the ground? More responsible companies, of course, approaching us. We've had some discussions, of course, with Sujoy and the team as well as with Dr. Prasad to see how collaboration could help as well. In that process, the other expense, because we are talking technical and commercial feasibility, the other big expense in India is we had set up for basically reasons of the budget this in Poseidon Solar's facility in Chennai. Then acquiring panels anywhere from Jaipur to Kolkata meant that we were spending lakhs of rupees and a few $1,000s just to transport the panel. So a country like India, you need more localized dismantling, recycling, and so on. The third, for want of a better word, problem is the informal sector. I won't call them a problem because I think they come with their significant benefits. But the challenge is they can acquire the panels because they are more interested in the aluminum frame or breaking the glass, taking things away, and then in most cases dumping it. So when you have that facility, the ability to dump it and not have the cost or the health and safety aspect of it, you can do it cheaper. And they were often able to procure the panels. As we are moving along, of course, things are changing. The cost of logistics I mentioned. Solutions, EPR. So, what we see in electronic waste as well. There'll be one way of doing it. But for me, again, a lesson learned, we have worked on e-waste for a long time. And whilst I see this government doing more than many other governments are, there still is, a significant lack of clarity, even on e-waste. And if this continues to happen on solar, this will create more lack of clarity. So what do you do with solar? How much do you charge per kilo, per ton of solar as well? How do you integrate that? Who's responsible? Who's the producer? All of this has to be clarified very, very, very quickly. So that will be one. Awareness raising, who's, as I said, who's the producer, what do you do with the panels, what is legal, what is not, and so on. And then, of course, the two key things will be technology upgradation. Because what we worked on, we started this in 2018. 5 years down the line, I'm sure there are more updated technologies. What we did was we studied the European technologies. We looked at chemical, thermal, and mechanical. And for various reasons, what we thought would work best for India was the mechanical one. And we achieved between 80-85% efficiency. We could have gone up to 95 had we integrated more chemical separation in there as well. However, again, because of a lack of budget, that wasn't possible. But automation, expanding this further. And then, of course, as I said, financial viability of this whole thing by either having them, localized in different parts, we looked into this mobile recycling facility or mobile dismantling. Can you take off the aluminum frames? Which we did, because that will increase the volume by nearly 4.8 times that you can take in the same size truck. So we did all of that as well. And I guess we still need to build on it. But once again, pleased to see First Solar already doing a lot on this, and looking forward to, any other thoughts and engagements we can have with other people in the room.
Sure. Thank you, Ankit. I think, Mr. Ghosh, turning to you, since we are on a similar set of topics, can you share some lessons from the commercial operation of your plant? Are there lessons similar to what Mr. Kapasi mentioned?
So we do recycling end of life as a voluntary, mandate from our shareholders, and clearly today, if you just focus on end of life waste from the field, recycling facilities won't be commercially viable, right? So you got to subsidize them somehow. Either as an investor, you look at a slightly larger objective of being responsible, or there is government mandates which come in, or both. The thing about recycling for us is, if you look at the waste we generate, it's at 3 stages, right? There is manufacturing scrap, which we generate while we are manufacturing modules. That actually is the biggest waste stream which goes into our recycling units today. The second is really the waste which gets generated from early demise of modules, mostly during logistics, transportation, handling, and installation. And really the field waste which comes from end of life at the end of 25 years is actually not that much right now, right? And that number is going to change as things go along. But across all of our manufacturing units, we've installed these end-of-life recycling facilities, predominantly short-term, to recycle our manufacturing scrap, because there is value in that scrap, which we would, especially the semiconductor is extremely valuable for us. And so we recycle and reuse the semiconductor material. But commercial viability is just not there today. But there's another aspect which is also happening as you look at large private sector investments coming into renewables, renewable assets in general, and solar in particular. There is a lot of mandate from the investors of the power generating assets to be more responsible, right? So again, independent of the government mandate, there is circularity, which is creeping into the procurement specifications of all renewable technologies. And you're looking at, how environmentally and socially responsible is the whole procurement action. So traceability against, let's say, use of forced labor. How do you look at the input carbon which goes into manufacturing of wind or solar technologies, how efficient it is from a water use standpoint. All of these criteria are coming in, especially into large financial investors who are investing at large into renewable assets in India and in the US and in Europe. So we see that being a forcing function to kind of start driving equipment manufacturers to design for circularity, right? The design for circularity is very important, right? I mean, that to me is one aspect which we overlook a lot of times. To give one example, I think taking off from what Dr. Prasad said, right? Delamination is one of the first steps where you're trying to get the semiconductor off from the glass. Now, solar panel semiconductors are encapsulated in polyolefins. So is there a target material which we can use, which, on a signal can unzip the whole thing and come out? So we are actually working with some of the academic institutions like University of San Diego to kind of figure that out. And if we are able to achieve that, then we would also venture into recycling, using our assets for recycling other technologies. Right now, we do it for only our thin film modules. So those are some of the things where, again, as OEMs, we are focused on.
Lots more questions, which, one other set of topics which I would like to pose to you and Ms. Melissa Barbanel at a later stage. But Dr. Kwang, given your role in PACE and, PACE's own role as a public-private collaboration platform, you have worked across different sectors, as you mentioned, electronics, food, capital goods. What are some learnings which we can take into the renewable energy space as we go along?
Over the past years, we looked into 5 value chains. What does circular economy mean? What are the barriers and what are the areas that needs action? So we looked into electronics, we looked into plastics, textile, food systems, and capital equipment. So by the time we've done those, patterns start to emerge. Of course, every sector has its specifics, but really there are 5 areas of common challenges and the common action areas. So that starts with product design, as Mr. Ghosh already said. So product design, then sourcing, then consumption patterns, reverse logistics, and infrastructure. So product design, I think Mr. Ghosh already gave a nice example of how do we design for functionality, durability, and at the same time design for circularity. It is, of course, a technical challenge, like the delamination issue, for example, but it's also an incentive issue because a market asks for efficiency. The market asks for durability and a price. The market does not ask for circularity. So without market incentives, it is very difficult for companies to invest in R&D for design for circularity. So that's an area where policy needs to play a role to create those incentives. The second, the second is sourcing. And so sourcing of responsibly extracted materials, but also recycled materials. And that's challenging because often recycled materials are not market competitive yet. For example, recycled plastics is often more expensive than virgin plastics because virgin plastics receive subsidy and recyclable plastics don't. And it's also difficult to compete sometimes in safety, quality, volume, and predictability. And for responsibly extracted materials, for example, minerals, I think someone mentioned traceability earlier, and that is a challenge. Like, how do we, as an end product manufacturer, raw material is like a few tiers, 10 tiers of supplier down. So how do we make sure that it is traceable of how that mineral is responsibly sourced or not, right? It's also a data challenge. Then on consumption pattern, it's not just about consuming greener. For the higher income population, which is over consuming, it's also about consuming less. So it's about sufficiency on top of efficiency, because any efficiency gain will be offset if we keep just growing our consumption. I think it's a very important topic, but it's also super, super difficult to address. So yeah, applaud again to the Indian government for really championing the lifestyle for environment movement in that. And then reverse logistics, I think Mr. Kapasi already explained very nicely the challenge there. Collection and transport cost, but also regulations for EU countries especially. Moving waste across country borders is very time consuming and also costly process. And then the last one of the 5 is infrastructure. So investing infrastructure in sorting, pre-processing, and recycling facilities. And now I think the challenge of critical mineral supply and gap is widely recognized by all the countries. And everybody also acknowledged the solution space is made up of more responsible mining and circularity. But I think everybody is very excited about investing in mining, opening up new mining projects. While for circularity, people will say, oh, the volume will be low for another 10 years, so let's not worry about it now. But I think there's already a lot of mineral-rich waste streams that's already reached high volume, like e-waste. So why don't we start improving our recycling infrastructure, our ecosystem for secondary materials to recover those materials already and prepare ourselves when the volume from old PV, wind turbines, and batteries rise. So talking about lessons, I'll summarize. There are plenty of lessons from the other value chains already that we see if we don't adopt a life cycle thinking from the beginning, we'll end up having to extract more and more materials and create more and more waste. So we need to learn from those lessons. And I think especially for clean energy sector, which is a sector created for planet good, for planet well-being. But if we only pursue its growth without managing all the environmental and social aspects of the growth, we're just falling into the old trap all over again and shifting one problem to the other.
One of the key points you mentioned is that the market is currently not asking for circularity, and that's resulting in higher cost of these products. So I think that will be a nice segue into my question to Ms. Barbanel. You have worked with US companies to understand global context in different aspects, especially mining, and how do they collaborate with regulatory agencies. One of the common refrains that we hear in industry, and I think Dr. Wong also touched upon it, is the cost and that these measures would be harsh on a fledgling sector. What would be your suggestions to the industry and government if we have to make this work? Because the concerns over cost are real, but at the same time, if we don't do it now, it will become a bigger problem to manage later on.
I had the opportunity to work with industry associations who were engaging with regulators both on the national level in the United States, but also internationally. And in my experience doing that work, I've seen that, regulators, they're not interested in quashing new industry. That being said, they're often not sophisticated. They don't know what you know, having done the actual work. And so what I find is really very important historically, in my experience, is that we bring together the industry sectors to communicate with their regulators. And one of the things, at least that I've seen in the United States, is that there is a sense that what's most important is a level playing field, so that all of the solar manufacturers or recyclers who are competing against one another are playing from an even playing field. They have the same set of requirements that apply to them so that they can do what they do fairly. Now, that being said, it's a little different in that now there is competition not just within a certain country, but across borders. And so it's really important that as government regulators are looking at developing regulations, they're doing it really with an eye to the global context. That becomes a lot more complicated and more difficult. And when you look at, for instance, what's happening in the European Union between CBAM and allowances being granted on the EU ETS for their internal companies, you can see how that's playing out. So I think that as this conversation is going on, the first thing is to have the conversation internally, domestically, and to make sure that regulators actually understand the challenges that exist. The other thing I would say is that there are two ways that the government can sort of impact this. First is obviously through regulation, which are the ways that government may be sort of pressing down on companies, but to make sure that things are done responsibly, well managed, with a minimum of waste. The other thing, and this goes to the comments we heard, about the how and the making it commercially viable, is that governments have the ability to incentivize. We have seen this in the United States through the Inflation Reduction Act and through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Monies have been set aside. The U.S. Department of Energy is making loans to fledgling battery recyclers. lots of money is going out the door to support these industries. In the Inflation Reduction Act, a bunch of the tax credits are designed to incentivize recycling. We see the investment tax credit, which allows companies to basically write off 30% of the capital costs of investment in certain recycling facilities. So this sort of a model could work to help encourage recycling. Also, the Advanced Manufacturing Production Credit under the IRA, it applies to critical minerals and batteries recycled in the United States. The Clean Vehicle Tax Credit under the IRA applies to battery components recycled in North America. As we heard in the last session, this is protectionist in a lot of ways. That's completely true. What the United States government is really recommending is that other countries could be doing the same thing to incentivize their own industries. I do think that we need to sort of see a two-pronged approach. One is to address the regulations that sort of impact how you do what you do, but then also to make sure that they're considering ways to build in incentives to encourage these new businesses to be really successful and to be competitive globally, because that is really the eye with which this has to happen.
Mr. Ghosh, I'll also turn to you with the same question over costs. As part of the Responsible Energy Initiative, when we have been interacting with a number of private sector entities, the key question which has come up is, fine, assuming in a hypothetical case we adopt all these measures in terms of circularity, being responsible, what is the guarantee that my competitor also would do? We would take up similar measures. Would I still be cost competitive in such a scenario? So just going back to the example of the recycling plant that you set up, did you have debates and discussions, and did you have to overcome doubts in terms of what will be the cost implications? Any challenges that you faced before getting it over the line?
No, as I said, when we started our journey as a manufacturer of solar panels 30 years ago, we designed our products for circularity, and we invested in recycling units across all of our manufacturing with the primary objective of recovering semiconductor material. So from our side, as our shareholders, it is not really a debate about cost, but it's a debate about what we stand for as a company. And as we are looking at decarbonizing the grid and more responsible forms of energy, we should be also conducting our business in the same vein. But that's just us, right? Solar manufacturing is an intensely competitive business, and therefore I think pretty much similar to the IRA, the Indian government had a great opportunity with the solar PLI to force large-scale manufacturing units, which is the intended outcome of the PLI scheme, to also invest in the recycling unit. I mean, it's not if you're looking at like multi-gigawatts of vertically integrated manufacturing, the incremental cost, the capex for the recycling unit is not that much, right? The issue really with recycling is not so much about the capex, but it's about the logistics costs. In India, for example, the logistics cost of moving the module from the field to the recycling unit is a lot higher than the actual cost of recycling it. Right, and you would also take a longer term view of the fact that you're building this infrastructure over a 10-15 year horizon, where the waste streams will increase as the deployment goes up. So I think we kind of missed one opportunity through the PLI, but for most manufacturers who are looking at large scale production, the question will be, how do you deal with your scrap? Right, there's going to be a lot more scrap generated than than the waste in the field, and you just can't throw that out. Right. So sometimes investing in that recycling infrastructure within the plant can kind of solve that problem. So you look at it as a issue to deal with scrap as opposed to doing something different.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I'm told that the Joint Secretary will be here in about 10-15 minutes. So while I do have some questions, I want to open it up to the audience.
So my question is to K. Wong and to Melissa. That I've been in the renewable discourse for nearly more than 20 years, and there's a term called negawatts in the renewable discourse. Now, unfortunately, this elephant in the room has been tossed out of the window. And since in AC, boxes that we conduct such conferences, elephant cannot be tossed out of the window. I'm sure it's hiding under some table. So my point is that we're shifting the burden. The conventional renewable saga of the old world order is about shifting the burden to where it is out of sight, out of mind, and hidden in the books as negative externalities, the unpaid for bills. The criminality is so humongous and so on the face. It cannot be. So my point is that can we bring megawatts as demand side interventions back into the reckoning, and can we start investing in it? And essentially mobility as a service becomes the starting point, because if you look at automobility, the love affair with motor car, as we know by now fairly well, didn't come naturally. It was manufactured by decades of efforts of the Henry Fords and the General Motors and the shenanigans of Toyota and the Kias and the Hyundai and the Tata Motors and the Maruti Udyog. So this artificial manufactured propaganda created what is called the car brain virus or motonormativity. This is another big monster, 800-pound gorilla. So coming to my question is that motonormativity, which has been identified as a health hazard, is bigger than what COVID was. And all the attention that COVID got, even if a fraction of attention was paid to unearth motonormativity, which blinds us to how automobiles today are weapons of mass destruction, which George W. Bush was looking for in Iraq, or along with his accomplices.
Keep it concise.
So yeah, so can we bring back megawatts, the demand side interventions back in the reckoning, and with Ankit Kapasi and other prospective investors from the ESG, which controls the world today, can we start investing in them? Thank you.
So my question is for Mr. Sujoy and Mr. Ankit, that do we have any observation about the failure rate of the solar panels in big solar parks versus the street light and this rooftop solar PVs? And the second question is about formal versus informal sector. That in battery recycling, we have seen that informal sector is dominating the market and they are becoming a big challenge as far as the safety and environment is concerned. So my question is that, as Mr. Ankit mentioned, whether the collaboration between the informal sector and formal sector in solar panel recycling can make the system more efficient and economical. Do you have a comment on this?
Maybe we'll take these two questions first and then.
So, a lot of time we've had the discussion about formalizing the informal sector, and we have now come to the discussion that it's integrating them rather than it's not possible to formalize them. They have the reason for doing so, and it's a challenge we will never overcome. Integrating the informal sector is a fantastic idea. We've been doing this on e-waste for the longest time now. The knowledge they possess, the intelligence they have as to where to find either e-waste or solar, I don't think the formal sector can do it at all. They have other means, their own networks as well, and that is, highly, highly valuable. So using them for the right ways, and in return giving them the right kind of knowledge, tools, personal protective equipment, anything to make sure the environment is safeguarded, the social aspects, which are a big concern as well, are safeguarded, will be a win-win. So that'll be my quick short one, but happy to take anything further.
So failure rates. I see, typically for solar modules are actually pretty reliable. Once they're installed properly, it's a static device. It's just two pieces of glass. So unless there's external mechanical damage or an extreme weather event, solar modules will last for 25, 30 years, right? Even at the end of its commercial life of 25 years, you still have about 80 to 85% of the energy capacity in the module. Typically, failure rates once the panel's installed, roughly about 0.3% over a 10-year period in terms of capacity. So if that's 0.3%, so if it's a 100 megawatt plant, over a 10-year period, you would have some normal wear and tear, breakages, roughly about 0.2 to 0.3%. So it's not a lot, right? Breakages do happen because of inexperienced O&M practices. Like most frequent one is when you clean the modules and your wiper is blade is the rubber is gone. You can have a glass breakage, or you're cutting vegetation from behind and your knife hits the back glass of the panel. Those are kind of things which it's basically human error which causes, but overall I would say that's the rate. There could be a higher rate of breakage as you look at more distributed installations, because when you look at large utility applications, the O&M is specifically done by very trained companies or staff who can handle these kind of and there's a lot of automation being introduced when it comes to cleaning of modules and handling of modules, right? But when you're looking at rooftops or small distributed installations, microgrids, for example, the level of expertise is not that much, and so you could have a higher breakage rate in those installations. Also, in terms of the formal versus informal, again, large power producers, if they have scale, like you have a site which is 500 megawatts, you would rather go and and especially with the new regulations which have come in, you would rather formally engage with the OEM to kind of recycle the modules, right? But again, if you are like a individual consumer with 5 panels on your roof, that's where the informal sector is what we see coming in, and then using recycled modules, which are which could have other issues in terms of EHS violations. Also, we see happening in that sector.
Informal sector is incredibly efficient in collection, especially in a consumer market. And I think the key is actually maybe not to formalize collection, but how do we get informally collected end-of-life products into high-quality facilities for proper recycling, instead of, in the case of e-waste, often burned in the backyard to extract copper. And then to this Mr.'s point, I think I fully agree with you on externality cost and how to bring externality cost into the balance sheet is part of creating the level playing field Melissa has talked about. And on the as-a-service business models, especially in European Union, it is really seen as a very promising route towards circularity, because it decouples companies' revenue stream from the volume of products that's sold. So it focuses on functionality, on performance, instead of on just selling more and more units of products. And actually, renewable energy is one of the sectors that has been pioneering this kind of business model. PPA is as a service model, right? You pay for electricity instead of you pay for the panels or wind turbines. And for mobility as a service, as you know much better than I do, it's a really broad range of business models. Anything from car rental to actually public transport. It's also mobility of service. I actually looked into this kind of service models in my previous job. And I think my key learning is, although it holds huge potential to deliver circularity, it may not do so by default. So as a service models, we still need to design these business models with circularity in mind, because rental cars are not automatically more circular than ownership cars.
Sure, thank you.
The learnings from what is happening here are actually very valuable, and I've been hoping and trying to bring those learnings out to other countries in the world, because as I see it, there's quite a few areas where India is actually ahead of a lot of the world, and mobility as a service, some of the models that we're seeing here are unique and not things I've heard of elsewhere. So I appreciate you raising it.
Any other questions, Rusha?
How do you see the materials like lithium, etc., being adopted by the, large OEMs? For example, large OEMs like, for example, Tesla, General Motors basically expect a lot of, premiumness, innovation, and a lot of, sharpness as far as their new products are concerned. and recycled material basically may not be having that sort of, I mean, what you call durability, quality, and
Okay.
I mean, innovative spirit in there. So how do you expect that, that they will be, I mean, adopted at scale? Otherwise, only the second tier or third tier companies are only going to the one who will be adopting it, and they might not be
Understood.
able to have that sort of value addition.
Noted. One more question.
Thanks to the panel for a very rich discussion. I just wanted to zero in on a point that Kay had brought up. Sufficiency. I think it's a word that you don't often hear. But Kay, can I just get you to think, to think aloud more about the idea, and also what are the opportunities for expanding this conversation, collaborations, research, so on and so forth? Yeah.
Sure. My question is for Sujay. Whenever we talk about solar, mostly we talk about, rooftop. But, there is also a, untapped market of, the solar energy by small instruments. Like, we used to have, if you remember, in calculator, which was a solar charge. Or maybe, there is a potential of, these batteries like a computers and all those things. And these markets are totally untapped. And, there is not much happening. Yeah, there is slight happening. But why solar is only rooftop? So that's my question to Sujay.
Sure.
Yeah, if I understood correctly, there was a question on sufficiency, and there is a question on competitiveness of recycled material. Is that right? Yeah. I think on the competitiveness of recycled material, it's very true. Recycled materials currently, most of them, especially plastics, textile, which is any material is not a commodity. It's not competitive yet in both price, quality, volume, safety to virgin materials. And I think there the government can do a lot. So through public procurement, for example, if the government, large buyers, public and corporate buyers, send market a signal, say, hey, I would like to increase recycled content in the goods that are purchased, it can help to really grow the secondary material supply chain better, right? Because the primary material supply chain has been really perfecting over decades and centuries, while the secondary material supply chain is far less behind in terms of its maturity. So sending market signals through procurement can be a way to mature that and get it more market competitive. And on the question about sufficiency, it's a really good one, and it's a really profound one as well. I think I would love the suggestion to expand discussion on it. I think it's something that we, like everyone intellectually understand. We need to talk about sufficiency in addition to efficiency. But how to do that? The kind of even the knowledge base is still quite limited. There's no recognized targets yet on what is sufficiency or who gets to define sufficiency, right? It's also because our economic model, the only successful economic model we know so far, really builds on growth, growing production, growing consumption. So although the world, especially in Europe, there's a lot of talking about sufficiency, but even the scientists are still trying to wrap their heads around of, what does that mean and how can we define that?
Thank you. Sujay?
So your question was why solar is only rooftops. It's not. Utility scale solar is perhaps the biggest, large grid scale power plants is perhaps, if you look at the overall market or the production side or the demand side, that's about 85-90% of the world's demand. Rooftops relatively is smaller in terms of capacity, and then maybe the balance 10%. And then there are very niche applications like off-grid, solar lights, solar lanterns to your watches and calculators and space. But those are really very niche, very different applications, and they're not scaled, right? So when most people talk about solar photovoltaics, it's generally for generating electricity, whether it's on a ground or whether it's on a roof. Some of the other applications are not really scaled to scale.
The right segue, and I would like to welcome Mr. Lalit Bora, the Joint Secretary for Solar and Storage in the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy Government of India. He has been associated with work related to solar energy, which includes both grid scale as well as decentralized solar. And he is handling the flagship programs of the Government of India in the solar sector, including the rooftop solar program, the PM Kusum scheme, which aims to remove the diesel dependency of the agriculture sector, the central public sector undertaking scheme, the production linked incentive for solar manufacturing sector, etc. He's also handling charge as the Director General of the National Institute of Solar Energy. Welcome, sir. We request you to address the gathering. In the meantime, I thought I'll just very briefly, we had an enriching panel discussion where I think couple of key points which came up, which we would request your views on, is what could be the further levels of clarity that can be provided as far as the recycling rules go, and what would be, for example, the expectation of the government of India from organizations like think tanks, R&D institutes, and the private sector. How can we collaborate with you? So these were couple of quick takeaways that we also wanted to place before you and request you to address the gathering.
Good morning to everyone, and I'm extremely sorry that I got late, and there was series of, because of the G20 and all teams are leaving Delhi, so we are going through series of meetings. So I'm really sorry that I came late and I have to rush back also. I thank you WRI and for this event Connect Karo 2023 and giving me this opportunity to come and address on a topic which is of very major importance for the entire sector, RE sector. We have seen a growth of RE in India, and the India is very committed as far as the energy transition is concerned, but this energy transition has to be done along with the energy security. That we are very clear that whatever we do, but at the same time we have to ensure that the electricity is available to each and every sector. And it is a time when India is growing up, the demand of electricity is increasing at the rate of 10 to 12%. And RE is playing an important role, because if growth is so much, then whatever the additional capacity which will come, it has to come through the RE sector mainly. The thermal will play its own role, because it's still like a lot of technological things like battery storage, the cost of electricity through the battery storage are too high in India. So thermal are playing their role, but RE has now come into the center stage, and as we have already seen, by June we have more than 70 gigawatt of solar and about 45 gigawatt of wind. And if we look at the overall non-fossil sectors, so it's more than 183 gigawatt of non-fossil energy which we have done, and we have gone for a target of 500 gigawatt, which we have, our Prime Minister has already announced as a part of Panchamrit. So in order to integrate that 500 gigawatt, the battery requirement has also increased, with more and more solar coming up, solar which is expected to be about 300 gigawatt by 2030. We already know that the wastage coming out of the solar panels are increasing, and once those projects which started coming up by 2010 will complete their life, then the waste generation will suddenly increase. So the MNRE has got some study done, and by that study we came to a conclusion that after 2035 the requirement of solar waste will be tremendous, and we have to do something. So we have a time period. The time is not too large, because if we look at the policies at the world level, so every country is framing the policies that how they should go ahead. And I personally feel that this is a sector like an IT sector. When the IT was growing, then we let it grow, and after certain stage the IT recycling and all those things have come into picture. So India is also in a stage where the RE is increasing, And it is the high time that the government, the think tanks, the business communities all come together to find a way in which when the challenges comes after 2032, 2033, when we have a large scale of waste generated, so how we can take care of this. Because this becomes all the more important since as per the IEA studies, it is not only the solar waste, but the batteries which will be going to have a large input in the sector, and the life of battery will not be as large as the life of a solar panel is. So that part also will come into picture. And when we combine this with the energy security, when the issue of critical minerals comes, so the country which recycle their product and use the critical minerals in an optimum way, that will be the one which will achieve the energy security in a faster way. And for India, it becomes all the more important with having a more than $90 billion of the import bill of the oils. The energy security comes and plays a very important role. We have been doing some things, and the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has already come out with the R&D proposals, where we have asked the academia and the industries to join hand together and do some R&D projects where we could understand that how much we can extract. But it is going to be an informal sector, because you see in India the waste collection, we are not very good. If you see everywhere, the waste collection is not very good, and we have to include the informal sector into this, because it is ultimately they who will go and collect the wastages which are there at the different part. And that supply chain need to be developed, taking into sector the informal sectors as well as the business houses, who can ultimately optimize the cost. You see, one thing is very clear, as long as it is going to be costly, it will not be acceptable. So maybe government will initially fund them, government will initially give some part of a viability gap funding to develop the sector. But the way we are moving 500 gigawatt by 2030, maybe 1200 gigawatt by 2047, and net zero by 2070. So the requirement is increasing, and all those plants will continuously require the recycling. And the recycling may increase even much faster, because all those the technology is changing from multi to poly to now TOPCon and all those things coming up. The industry will always do away with their older panel and go for the new panel. So where will those panels will go away? They will either go into the secondary market, which need to be developed in India, or they will become a waste. So these are the all open questions, and I can tell you very clearly, looking after the circular economy in the ministry, that we are looking for a solutions, and it becomes very essential that such kind of seminars are conducted, and in those seminars, when deliberations are done, and the result of those deliberations are when given to the government by the think tanks, then we sit down, we have discussions with the stakeholders and come to a conclusion that how to go ahead into this. The only thing which I can say is that it provides a big business opportunity for the businessmen, starting from the people who are going to set up the industries where the extraction will take place, the industries which is going to handle the supply chain part of the entire network. At the same time, the R&D institutes who are going to do research and have the patents into these areas. We are in touch with WRI and the other think tanks to decide how we ultimately go and implement this. As of now, we have made our intentions very clear after bringing the e-waste policy, where we have said that the developers who are putting the plant will have to keep their waste there itself. They cannot keep it throwing here and there. But just making a policy will not solve the problem. We have seen that recent cyclone in Gujarat has led to a lot of solar panels on rooftop being thrown as a waste in the various places. Now government will have to work. We are in touch with the various state governments, but again the informal sectors will come and play an important part, and he will pick up those solar panels only when he knows that he is going to get a money out of it. So it's a complete ecosystem which needs to be developed, and it is something which I say that maybe initial 3-4 years we can say that we will do it or will not do it, but after 2030 it is something which we will have to do it. So it's a good forum where WRI is doing this thing. WRI already we have taken them with our knowledge partner, and we expect a lot of deliberation here, and I wish you all the best. And whatever the deliberations are there, the ministry will look at them with an open mind, and we will frame the policies accordingly. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And indeed, energy is a wicked problem, and multiple solutions. And it's a very lot of feedback loops, and only a systems level thinking can overcome this. So, with that, I would like to thank Mr. Bora for sparing time to address us, and panelists for a wonderful discussion, and of course to you audience for taking time out, listening through, and also for some insightful questions. Thank you all. I understand lunch is served. We could proceed before the next set of sessions. Thank you.